I am joined by Maxwell Ivey, also known as the Blind Blogger. His journey began in a family carnival business, shifted into brokering amusement rides online, and eventually led him to become a life coach, a publicist, a podcaster, and now an accessibility advisor. Through each chapter, Max has defied fear, leaned into interdependence, and built a life that proves that accessibility and resilience benefit everyone. In this conversation, we'll explore his story, his work in accessibility, and what it really means for you to ask for help. Max Ivey is known as the blind blogger. He has been educating people about accessibility ever since starting his first site, brokering used amusement park and carnival rides in 2007. Here comes my favorite part. When accessibility was so poor that he had to teach people himself to code HTML just to get online. Like, those days seem so old these days. He believes that accessibility is in everyone's best interest, and I want to welcome you to Flying Upstream, Max.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I enjoyed our conversation a little while ago, and I'm looking forward to a great one today for your audience.
Me too. So let's start at the beginning. Your story has a lot of moving parts, a lot of components that I want to touch up on. The first one is you have worn many hats. The first one that is very intriguing is carnival owner. Then you were a broker, a coach, a publicist, a podcaster, and today you're an accessibility advisor. How did you learn to cut through the many, many, many options and find clarity to your true path?
Well, first, I need to admit that I can't take credit for a lot of those decisions, that I've been blessed to have a community of people in person or online who have helped me see my abilities or helped me realize that I was using time in areas that I may have been competent in but wasn't expert or genius in. And so I've been really lucky. I grew up in a family of carnival owners, and thanks to encouragement from family members, friends, teachers, scoutmasters, etc., I graduated from a traditional high school and college. I'm one of the few blind Eagle Scouts. A lot of what has helped me along the way, I learned growing up in a family of carnival people, because you learn from an early age that no matter what happens, you have to get open. And when you're working in an online business and things are constantly changing around you, the decision, the ability to just continue to move forward and do the next thing is, something you can look back at those times and draw on to, to find those motivations to keep moving, even after you're on your fifth different thing and you're wondering, am I ever going to be a success? Am I ever going to be a success at what I'm doing? That ingrained belief that you not only have to find a way to get to that next step, but that you will, that you've built up the resilience over time to where you're good at finding those solutions and good at asking for help and good at seeing the positive and many other things that go into being an entrepreneur of any kind, especially an entrepreneur who has gone from a very challenging business in the amusement world where so much of your life is outside your control, and then going to the online world where, as a person with a vision loss and depending on a screen reader, quite often a lot of the technology is beyond my control, and you just have to find a way to continue to move forward.
I want to touch on 2 points. A couple of things that you said were talk to me a little bit about being in the carnival amusement world. I know nothing about it, so I don't even know what question to ask. But you mentioned about how so much of it is outside of your control. What did that look like?
Right. So we had a small carnival. We had 7, 8 rides at our best. And being in Texas means that most everybody we competed with had more rides, newer rides, prettier rides, scarier rides, whatever you want to say. They had it, we didn't. So we were a small carnival. What I knew about the amusement business has changed drastically since then because it has become so much more corporate. It's much more year round. The amount of money being thrown around is insane. And I don't say that as an exaggeration. It is insane what new amusement equipment will cost you these days. And of course, the weather, the vagaries of people, whether they decide they want to spend their money or not that week, the organizers, whether they put the effort in to create a crowd in the first place, trying to figure out how to get supplies in stock, either going and getting it or having it delivered, just finding help in a traveling situation. So there's so many challenges, most of it beyond our control, and most of it you just do the best you can each week. There were weeks where we had like three people operating 7 or 8 rides, and some days they would just follow the customers around from one ride to another because that was the way we were processing their rides, their tickets. You know, we've been places where nobody showed up. We've been places where we subcontracted with other companies to bring rides alongside ours for big events, and they decide not to show up. And so, really, you're so much of it is beyond your control. And my dad had a great attitude about it. He was one of those people who could see the positive. He could laugh at the hard times, and focus on how do we get to next week, and after next week, how do we get to so it's I feel like the being in that business, whether we're talking about as an operator of a carnival or as a broker, and then I feel like losing having the vision loss that I had over time from retinitis pigmentosa, that I have I started learning at an early age that most of the world was beyond my control. And most people will think, well, if you when you believe that, that's like saying it's like, well, why should you even show up if you believe most things are beyond your control? And there are things I can influence. There are things I can control, but the list is a lot shorter than most people would say it is if you ask them to make out their list of things they can control. And what it does is when you realize that all you can do in most, for the vast majority of life's aspects, the best you can do is respond to what happens in your life or what you cause to happen in your life. It provides a certain amount of freedom, a certain amount of peace that comes with accepting that when you're not in control of everything, you're also not responsible for everything.
I like that. I like that. I hadn't heard that before.
It just occurred to me, and it occurred to me because I'm one of those people who's always taking responsibility for stuff I didn't cause. I
Mm.
will apologize for stuff that I had nothing to do with, but because I was involved in it in some way, I will take responsibility. So, that's another where when you realize what you don't control, then you don't have to blame yourself. You don't beat yourself up. I mean, yeah, you probably still will some of the time. We're all crazy human beings, but when you can accept what you don't control, then you can also accept that you're not responsible.
That's beautiful. And it also brings me to, one of the difficulties, at least in my journey, has been what you talk about that you've done and have had to master essentially is surrender and surrendering to, what may happen with the things that are not in our control. And it's such a beautiful part of the journey that is so painful, at least for me, it was so painful to accept, like, okay, I don't have control over that. So why am I putting energy towards it when really the outcome is nothing that I can do anything about anyway? So I love that you shared that. And the other thing that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to come back to is your screen reader and how you count on that as having, vision loss. And as I sit here and I'm looking at you on the screen and I'm having this conversation with you, I couldn't 100% tell that you have vision loss, right? So that kind of brings me to the topic of not just technology and vision loss and how it can help people. but also interdependence, which is a topic that you and I touched on the last time that we spoke. Talk to me about how all of that sort of comes together.
Right. Well, for me, I am almost totally blind, so I use a screen reader. People with less vision loss will use screen magnifiers of different levels of strength. People who have vision but don't have good motor control may use what are called mechanical switch devices. So we there's a variety of adaptive tech that's being used, but especially for screen readers, the person who builds the website, who designs it, develops it, codes it, they have a large amount of impact on my enjoyment of the website because there's quite a bit that if the person building the website doesn't describe it properly, then my computer can't describe it to me at all. So, and I see where you're going there because I do often talk about how accessibility really needs to be more of a collaboration, more about communication and understanding each other's position in this because it's hard for me. Well, I understand somewhat the challenges of a developer because I built my own website and coded it for 5 years, but I was never a quote coder unquote. I could make it run, but I couldn't make it run prettily or do any of the fancy stuff. And I don't think I've even now have a website that would be considered accessible under the WCAG guidelines. But I do the best I can, and I understand. I have empathy for the developers and the coders, but they may not understand my challenges. We have to find a way to have empathy for each other and to share our individual experiences so that we can help each other make the internet more accessible, regardless of your disability or how you navigate the internet. So that's one of the things I really hope we can get to is more communication because quite frankly, so much of accessibility these days is still about you better do it or else that there
Hmm.
will be regulatory penalties, there could be lawsuits, there could be negative publicity, you could get boycotted. Those are still the majority of the conversations around accessibility. And that hasn't really gotten us anywhere because, here we are over 10 years since it was ruled that the ADA applies to the internet. And we're still looking at 3 to 5% of the internet being accessible. So obviously, what we're doing and have been doing isn't working by itself. I'm not going to be naive and say that by educating people and asking them to work with me to improve a website, an app, or their content is going to get us there either. But the two combined, along with helping businesses better understand the real world tangible benefits of accessibility and inclusion, are probably going to get us there or closer to that goal a lot more quickly than if we're trying to depend strictly on compliance. So, yes, I'm a very big proponent of interdependence, of collaboration, because I can't do this without them, and they can't really do it without me because there are things about navigating the world with a screen reader that you only will only learn if you have to use one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so glad that you went into the depth that you did. That's sort of what I wanted because I think that there's this idea, right? For me, as someone who sits on this side, I can go ahead and be like, yeah, I understand that maybe he needs extra tools, etc. But do I really know what those tools are? Do I really know what I can do that could impact and make your experience better? So I really appreciate you going into that depth. And what are some other ways that you think imposing this sort of, the ADA guidelines and kind of saying, yeah, they apply to the internet too, kind of making it like a forceful thing rather than an educational thing? What other negative connotations or negative results do you think that has yielded in the community?
Well, I think that when you focus on compliance, all you get is fear based compliance. You get companies that only want to meet the minimum standard. When somebody does something out of obligation, they don't do it anywhere near as well as when they do something out of a sincere desire to help another person or to make the experience for their customers better. So I would say another one of the negative side effects of leaning so heavily on the negatives of punishment as a means of bringing about accessibility is it results in people just meeting minimum standards. All they want to do is, what does the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines or WCAG say? How can I meet that? And you're starting to see a lot of content around how can AI help me meet those minimum standards. And the truth is, the minimum standards are fine. That will make your website accessible, but that doesn't mean it will make it enjoyable. It doesn't mean that somebody who has a disability who depends on the technology will feel like they can use something smoothly or easily. I recently recorded a video about my frustration with the variety of live streaming options. And in there, I said that to me, the standard needs to be accessibility, easy to use, and reasonably economical. And I said it that way because there are lots of things that are technically accessible, but they are not easy to use, or they are not easy to use without assistance from somebody who would be, quote, able bodied, unquote. So I really hope we can get to the point where people will see past the minimum standards. They'll go past the fear. Unfortunately, one of the big topics right now in the disability community is the European Accessibility Act, which just took effect recently for new companies and will take effect next year for existing companies, that not only sets very hard standards for accessibility, but comes with real financial penalties that, at least for now, the business community seems to be convinced will actually happen. Now, will they still be convinced those penalties are going to happen this time next year or 5 years from now? It all depends on whether or not the government agencies decide to, enforce the laws that they've written in a way that they've told everybody they're going to. It's just like being a parent. If you tell a kid you're going to spank them or ground them and you never do either, eventually they're just going to shake their heads and look at you and maybe stick their tongue out at you because they know that you're not going to do what you said you're going to do. So we'll see. Um, a lot of people expected more from the Americans with Disabilities Act in general when it was passed over 30 years ago. But you know me, I tend to focus more on the positives, and I like to give people reasons why they should want to make the extra effort. And I also love giving them some things they can think about to get started with that are maybe a little different than what they would expect from an accessibility expert. And some of the things I hope to share with you in a little bit are based on the fact that there's kind of a seesaw thing that happens when you improve.
Max?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I had lost you there for a minute. We lost
Oh, darn.
connection.
Darn.
So
So,
you were saying, though, something I was really interested in. You were saying that you love offering some options that are maybe a little bit different than what others offers. So yeah, let's pick up there.
okay. What I have figured out is that when you improve accessibility, you generally improve user experiences, but the same thing works in reverse. If a website owner is really focused on making the experience as smooth and enjoyable as possible for the largest number of their users as possible, they will often eliminate some accessibility issues. So when I first talk to somebody about accessibility, I'm not talking about them hiring me, I'm just talking about things they can think about and implement on their own, is first, make the most important thing the most important thing. And I hear from marketers and site builders all the time, that's what we tell our clients too, but most of them don't do it. um, when you focus on the one thing that is the reason for you having your business or having your site, or you focus on the two or three most important things, then you eliminate a lot of other information. You eliminate a lot of other tools and widgets and stuff that can cause accessibility issues. You make it easier for somebody with a disability who's using adaptive technology like me to navigate your site and get to what they want or need quickly and make their purchase or make a decision quickly. So focus on the most important thing. For example, if your most important thing is selling a service, then I should be able to quickly determine what your service is, what your credibility is, what you would charge me if I decided to work with you, if you have a set scale of fees, a link to contact you, to hire you, or to schedule a meeting with you. So those would be things that we would want to be able to do, and you could probably do that website in like 3 pages. And so I talk about making the most important thing the most important thing. Then use a simple design. Every time you add something new that's fancy that you think is going to keep people on your website or could help them connect with you more, it's an opportunity to cause an accessibility issue.
Mm.
And you'd be surprised how simple a new addition can be that can cause problems for people using technology like I do. My One of my favorite hated ones is modules people use for their email sign up. Most every website I go to nowadays, the first thing I do is click out of a thing to sign up for their email list, and I don't begrudge them doing that. But the problem is sometimes I can't click out of the list. Sometimes I can't navigate to the button to close it, and so I end up having to close the page, or in some cases, close my browser. And if I do that, I'm never coming back to your website. I can guarantee you that. So this is a very small thing that most people use. They wouldn't think of it as fancy, but it's an example of something small that can cause an accessibility issue, and why you want to go with simple stuff is best. Then you want to take a minimalist approach to your online content. If a link, a button, an image, a video, a heading, a block of text doesn't need to be on a page, then get rid of it. If you can move it to another page, fine. If you can combine it with other information, fine. Because people using adaptive technology, it takes us longer to go through a screen, much less 3 screens or 5 screens or 10 screens. So anything you can do to cut down the amount of information we have to navigate is one of those things that makes our lives easier at scale, and something we'll be very happy and grateful for. So minimalist design. I especially run into this when people are concerned about having to add those alternative text to all their images. And I tell them, well, if you get tired of adding the alt text, look at your images and see if there are some you don't need.
Mm.
And then the fourth thing I usually talk about is keyboard navigation first. Most people still don't understand that the majority of people with disabilities don't have access to a mouse. We can sometimes simulate a mouse, but we don't have access to it in a reliable way. So websites should be built with keyboard navigation first, with keyboard shortcut keys if you're able to include those, and then expand out to using the mouse, using the hover key, hover pad, swipes, all that other good junk. But as long as you maintain the keyboard navigation, then that really makes the lives of people with disabilities easier. It also really helps with people who are dealing with the challenges of aging, who don't see themselves as disabled, but are many of them have difficulties with technology as they age. And so being able to use a keyboard, which many of them are more familiar with than other options, is another way of keeping them in the game and making them feel comfortable with your website. So these are things that won't show up on WCAG. I don't know that you can test for them, but they're the kind of things that if you'll think about these 4 things I just mentioned to you before you get into the nuts and bolts of your website, the odds are you'll eliminate most of the stuff that you're going to find if you do, say, a website evaluation or use a site checker for accessibility per se.
I feel like you've just given small business owners, digital business owners, like the blueprint to, making their websites accessible to people with disabilities and who use assistive technologies. Because I will tell you, sitting here, that as I put my websites together, I thought about zero of these things. And as I sit here trying to, recording this episode with you because I want to amplify your voice and your message, it kind of brings those things to light and the importance of that. I think about you being on my website and navigating it and how difficult that could be the way that it sits right now. And that's just being fully honest, because I think that's part of the process here is being honest with ourselves about what we have and have not done to make the internet and whatever we're building digitally accessible to people in the disability community and to those who are using assistive devices. even though we may not think about it, you may also, as a business owner, be leaving out a whole crowd of people that could be buying your product and that could be accessing your information and learning and benefiting from it simply because we didn't have this blueprint that you just shared with us. So thank you so much.
Right, and thanks for giving me such an obvious segue there, talking about the audience that they're missing out on, because that's one of the things I really like emphasizing more. And I recently learned from one of my podcast guests that the information I was using was probably wrong. It's probably even bigger than I thought it was. So I believe that one of the things the disability community gets wrong is we don't spend enough time really clearly explaining why the business owner should care about inclusion. And so
Mhm.
there are four parts to this. The first is that when you improve accessibility, you improve the overall user experience for everyone else. Uh, there are so many examples of that, especially when you realize that things that help people with vision loss or other disabilities also help people visiting your site on mobile devices. So that's one. Number two is when you improve when you improve accessibility, you raise your search engine rankings, and we're starting to find out that you even influence the AI bots, because it turns out that the AI bots are not real smart. They have to be educated. And one of the best ways you can educate the bots and the search engines is through accessibility, through proper headings, through good labels, through alt text, through the many things that y'all would find out about accessibility if you did a Google search about what are basic WCAG guidelines. So AI really loves accessibility because it lets you tell them who you are, what you do, and why other people should care about your business. Uh, the third part is it opens up a huge market, a mostly untapped market of highly loyal consumers who will advocate for your brand. So as far as the numbers go, the official number that you'll see most places is 1 in 6, which would be about 50, 60 million in the US and probably about 1.3 billion globally. However, that only covers the number of people who identify as having a disability. There are lots of people who don't identify for one reason or another. Many people who are neurodivergent will not identify because they're afraid of being stigmatized, and in some cases, losing employment or not being able to gain employment in the first place. There are people who are aging, who are dealing with vision loss, hearing loss, loss of motor control, who will not see themselves as disabled, but they have a disability. And there are many people who are disabled based on any particular task you want to measure. So I generally say about 60 million, and about probably about 15 of or so of that is vision loss, which is one of the hardest things to make accessibility for. But I recently interviewed Douglas Katz, who he did some research based on what he calls the the disability or accessibility curve, and he figures that if you bring in all the people that aren't currently getting counted, it's probably closer to about 115 million in the U.S. that have some sort of a life challenge that we would describe or classify as a disability if they were willing to stick their hand up and go, "Hey, I'm one of y'all." So, and of course, that doesn't count people who are dealing with trauma or dealing with changes in life, such as childbirth or menopause, which also have effects on your life that, while may not be categorized as a disability, can certainly cause you to feel like you have one. So the numbers are huge, but we're beyond that. We're a very loyal market. We will support companies in good times and bad times if they are making an effort to be inclusive in the way they deliver their products or services or the way they design their products or services. Um, we will even pay more because there's such a small percentage that are embracing inclusion in their business models that we see it as a value added um, proposition. Now, we shouldn't have to, we shouldn't, but when so few companies care about making the effort to get my business, the idea that somebody is willing to make that effort has a value, and that shouldn't be discounted. And then we will advocate for businesses. I like to say that when you take steps to make your products, services, and content more accessible, so that you can reach people with disabilities, that it's like hiring influencers you don't have to pay. You know,
Mm,
so
I love that.
yeah.
I love that. And I really, really, really love that. Go ahead. I didn't want
No,
to
I
interrupt
appreciate
you.
you interrupting me. Sometimes I need it. Uh, and the fourth and last part is that it has to do with employment. When you hire somebody who has a disability, when you make the effort, and in many cases, accommodations are not expensive, they're not disruptive, they're just things people are afraid might be expensive or disruptive. When you can make the effort to bring in somebody with a disability to become part of your team or your staff or your workforce, you generally will get people who are dedicated, loyal, grateful, positive, optimistic, and most importantly, because we have to on a daily basis, you get problem solvers. So that's my fourth point as to why people should care about being inclusive and doing what they can to make the world, both online and in person, more accessible for people with all kinds of abilities.
I think that's so beautifully said. And I have worked in the disability world in a different capacity for a long time, for over 15 years now. And I will say that all of those things that you mentioned in my experience are true. Especially the being problem solvers in general. When you live day to day in a way that requires you to operate and to manage life differently than what most of us are used to, most differently than what fully able bodied and people with no disabilities or limitations do, it really does force you to learn to look at things differently and to learn to resolve things differently. I've also found that in my work with the people that I've worked with, in the disability community, that the level of connection is deeper, and I think that is because of the way that a lot of people in the disability community have to manage life, because there isn't always inclusion. So that when you do create a connection with someone, it seems to be, at least for me sitting on the other side of having these experiences, um, a deeper connection. And I am so appreciative of that. And also super appreciative of having you on today. Mostly appreciative of the fact that you have what it takes to get out here and deliver this message day by day. Because with, your vision loss, nobody would have anything to say, or even if they did, it doesn't matter, about you just choosing to not spread this message and just sort of deal with it in your own life. But instead, you're coming out here and putting yourself out there on your podcast, with the work that you do, on your blog, and with the connections that you make, and being out on social media, sharing this message and the importance of accessibility. So thank you
Uh,
so much. I'm
I,
truly
I
grateful for
appreciate
what
that,
you
and I
do.
just want to agree with what you were just saying there. Yes, we do make deeper connections because we have shared experiences and continuing shared challenges. But what you said about no one would have a problem, for the longest time, I fought the idea that I was inspirational or that I could be an advocate because I just didn't see what I was doing as having that kind of impact. And a friend of mine, she finally explained it to me. She said, "Well, Max, there are millions of people in this world who have absolutely no challenge other than the usual day-to-day stuff that prevents them from doing some of the more important things they would like to do or more fun things they want to do, but they don't." And she says, if you decided one day that you wanted to sit on your couch, eat junk food, and watch TV, nobody would say the first word about it. But the fact that you don't, the fact that you have decided to show up and share your experiences very honestly and in hopes of encouraging other people to get past the excuses and roadblocks that hold them back, she says, that's what makes your story special. So I appreciate you noticing that, recognizing that, appreciating that. That speaks very highly to you as a person. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. And thank you. I think it takes a special kind of person to be in the position that we're both in. So I appreciate. I have one last
Sure.
question for you. Um, a lot of times, and what we see is that illusions can hold people back, right? Like these ideas that we come up in our own head sometimes, or what the outside world is telling us. And a lot of people may find asking for help as a weakness, or kind of thinking that accessibility, like you mentioned before, is for a small group of people and not for them. How can you, or what advice would you give to someone who's on that verge of, I know I need the help, but I'm not the person that needs it? There are people who need it more. Maybe, someone who's like not confident in going out there and asking for the help, or asking to have the accessibility in whatever it is that they're navigating that would make their experience more
Right. So I
enjoyable.
have an expression for this, and it's something I've picked up over the years. So when it comes to asking for help or asking for opportunities or even accepting help or opportunities when they're offered to us, which trust me is a whole lot harder because when people offer to do nice things for us, whether we wanted them to or not, it just brings up the ego, dragons, gremlins, whatever you want to call them, and we are generally very defensive and protective. But when it comes to asking, which is the first step and the easier part, is I tell people that think about how good you feel when you do something for somebody else. You do something that for someone that all they can do is say thank you. They cannot do anything else for you but that. That's the only thing they can do. So I tell people when you to think to try to put the focus on the other person and remember when you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That is such a beautiful and perfect way to end this episode. I have nothing to add to that, but thank you so much. As I get here to wrapping up the episode, Max, again, thank you for being our guest. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for the courage that you display every single day and
Well,
everything that
thank you
you
so
do.
much. I appreciate it. And it's been a real honor to be on the show with you today.
Thank you. And for all of our listeners and viewers, I hope that today Maxwell's story reminds you that strength isn't in holding on tightly. It's in opening up and asking for help and creating space for everything that could be possible. Accessibility, resilience, and interdependence at the end of the day benefit us all. And if you want more stories, resources, and behind the scenes magic, head on over to flyingupstreampodcast.com and join the movement. Keep